So this recording is going to talk about the different types of polygonal elements that you can create inside of the 3D environment of Maya. You'll notice that at the very top of the screen we've got the poly modeling shelf showing, and there are orange icons up here in which you can easily select any of these icons and add the objects directly to your stage area. You can also go to the Create menu and click on Polygon Primitives, and you'll see that there are additional polygonal objects in which you can add to your stage utilizing these in the lower section. The ones you see in the upper section are the most often used polygonal elements. So let's start off very simply by clicking on a sphere. So when you add a sphere to the stage, you'll see that it always will get added to the 0, 0, 0 quadrant. If you like to zoom in on said sphere, if you press the F key, that will frame your object, and it's a quick way of zooming in to your selected object. What you're seeing right here is called a smooth shade all mode, in which case you're seeing the gray coloring showing through the green wireframes of the object in object mode. As I hold down my Alt key and my left mouse button, you'll see that I can tumble and move around the stage as well. For more information on tumbling, there are separate videos for that. Please see those in the modules. If you want to toggle between the smooth shading as well as the wireframe mode, you can see that there's an easy toggle by using the number 4 key or the number 5 key on the keyboard. You'll see that notices are showing up at the top letting you know that the 4 key and the 5 key are the ways of toggling between the two. In addition, you can always use the sub-navigation panel where it says shading and click on smooth shade all or wireframe. The wireframe once again is the number 4 key as your reminder. The reminder key isn't so much there for the 5 key, but that's an easy way of toggling between the two as well. Once you've created an object, you'll see that over on the right hand side the channel box is appearing. You may also see what's called the attribute editor. The attribute editor looks a little bit more tabular at the top versus the channel box. It's more vertical in the section over here on the right hand side. Anytime you add a new object to the stage, you have the option to modify its attributes. So for example, in this input section, you'll see that I've clicked on Polysphere 1, and over on the right hand side is where I can change some of these attributes. So if I would like to decrease the number of subdivisions, I can select, click and drag, and do both the subdivisions axis and height at the same time. If I type in the value 12 and press the Enter key, because I highlighted both fields at the same time, both of them have now been updated to having only 12 subdivisions. These are essentially the edges that you see going around the circumference of the sphere, as well as the vertical ones you see going through the circumference of the vertical aspect of the sphere. In addition, the size of this object is based on its initial creation, which is a radius of 1. If we would like to increase the radius to 2, we can type that value in right there, and that will increase the size of it as well. When I change the attributes of the object utilizing the inputs on the right hand side, you'll see that these values in the upper section of the channel box are not being modified. So there is a difference between changing the actual size of the object versus using the scale key. Now you may know from other videos the hotkey for scale tool is the R key. It also is the icon located at the lower section of the toolbar on the left hand side. So the R key basically, or the scale tool, allows me to click and drag and increase the size of an object. If I do so in the center area, this is going to increase it proportionally in all directions. If I do it just on one of the boxes that represents the scale tool, you'll see that this will increase it in an oblong fashion. The colors that you see showing from the scale tool are represented in the lower legend of the stage area, in which the Y is the green, and that's where it's going to grow nice and tall. The Z is going to be the blue, which grows towards you, and then the X is to the side. This is your lateral growth on the side. These same mechanisms and same layout are utilized for the Move tool when you press the W key. The W key is also the Move tool located over here. You'll see that these arrows represent the direction in which you can move the objects. The green is going to move it up and down on the Y, the red will move it left and right on the side or the X, and then the blue will move it forward and backward on the Z. As we make these adjustments in the main stage area, you'll see these numbers are changing on the right hand side. So this is what we're looking at for a sphere. If you'd like to move this object off to the side, you can go back and install, or insert, I should say, another object to your stage, such as the polycube. By adding in the polycube, by default, it comes in as a 6-sided solid object. Once again, to press the F key, this will frame your one object. If you press the A key, this frames all objects on the stage. So the F key will frame the selected object, the A key will select all or show all objects. In looking at this polycube, it has 6 sides and no subdivisions to it. This makes it really difficult for us to morph it into a different shape or otherwise. So once again, if we come over to the right hand side, there's the polycube inputs area, in which case I can increase the subdivision's height, width, and depth. These values can be the same all the way around, or they can be different based on which direction you would like to add more to. So let's do something simple like 2, 3, and 4. This is going to be the width, the height, and the depth. And so this again is updating the subdivisions, increasing edges through the object. That's not updating the actual height, width, and depth. So now you can see that we've increased the number of subdivisions that are inside of the object. Alright, so now what we're looking at is an object in object mode. So this object in object mode basically says that there's green wireframes, and if I want to again pick up, move, scale, drag, rotate, I can do so while the object is in object mode. The other mode that we refer to in Maya is called component mode. Now there's an easy way of toggling between the two if you are an icon person. You'll see in the upper section of the screen there's an icon for object mode and there's an icon for component mode. There's another way of getting to component mode, and that is to right click and hold on top of the object, and you can release on top of edge, vertex, or face. These are the 3 different ways of modifying the shape of an object is by selecting the faces, by selecting the edges, or by selecting the vertices, or the vertex. Okay, so while those look stretched, that's the way we can go through it and modify the shape. There's other tools that we're going to talk about this chapter, such as using the bevel tool, the bridge tool, and the extrude tool. This will allow us to actually create a decent looking object that we're trying to create. When you right click and hold, you'll go back into object mode. Another method of getting into object and component mode is to click on the modeling toolkit on the right hand side. This is also the icon in the upper right corner. Inside the modeling toolkit, you'll see the very first icon there is the object mode, which is what we're looking at. This is going to be vertex, edge, and now face mode. So these are easy ways of getting into those different modes. When it comes time for you to select multiple faces, I encourage you to press the Q key or to go back to the selection arrow. When you are working with the move, the scale, and the rotate tools, and you select multiple faces, Maya by default tries to extrude those faces. You might ask, what does extrude mean? So let me show you what the difference is. When I select one face and I use the move tool and I pull it out, you'll see how it stretches it. Pressing the Z key will undo that. By clicking on the extrude tool, you'll see I've got a bunch of tools that come with it, and if I do the exact same maneuver, which is to move it out, you'll see that now I've not morphed the shape into something else. I've grown different faces, edges, and vertices from that particular object. So the idea of extrude is to be able to take an object and extrude different faces off of it to take it into a different shape, layout, object, etc. Whenever you're done with the extrude tool, you want to always go back to the Q key, which will again get you out of the extrude tool and allow you to continue to select multiple faces if you so desire, but it also just takes you out of the extrude. At this point, if we're done extruding this particular object, we cannot just swipe the whole thing and try to move it off to the side. This selects all the faces, but it throws off pivot points and doesn't work as well. So ideally, you want to always right click and go back into object mode, or select object mode from here. Turn on your move tool, which again is the W key, and move your object off to the side. I'm going to introduce to you yet another object. This is called the polytorus. The polytorus looks like a big donut or a tire or a ring of sorts. Now the cool thing about a polytorus, much like all the other shapes we've discussed here, is that it too has an input section in which we can change the shape and size of the polytorus. So by clicking on polytorus 1 underneath the input section, you can see that we can modify the actual section radius, the subdivisions, and the radius of the object. So I'm going to take the section radius down to 0.1 versus 0.5. And now you can see that I've got a much more smaller section radius of a tire, etc. This could be a great use for creating a bicycle tire, or in the case of creating a solar system, if I were to use the scale tool on this and squish this down, this will create some nice flat rings, in which case I can create rings around a particular planet. So let's say that was Saturn, or Jupiter, Now I've got a ring going around there. And then let's say I wanted to duplicate the object. So I'm going to select the rings themselves, and Control D is a great way of duplicating an object, and use the rotate tool. Now I've rotated the object sideways. Control D stands for duplicate. Again, you can get to that also by going to the edit menu and choosing duplicate from here as well. These rings, they happen to be on top of one another, so now with the secondary ring still selected, if we use our scale tool, we can scale this and make it a little bit bigger than the other set of rings, and now I've got a decent looking intergalactic rings around a planet creation. Okay, so whenever we create objects on the stage, we always want to make sure that we rename them. So I'm going to click off and go back to my Q key. Again, the Q key is the selection arrow. And again, if this is my planet, rather than leaving it named as P-Sphere 2, we can call it Saturn. And this we'll call ring 1. And this we can call ring 2. It is important to rename all of your objects. You'll see that when you do rename your objects over here in the channel box, they will also update over here on the left-hand side under Outliner. If your outliner is not being displayed, possibly you need to click on the word outliner over here on the left-hand side, or you may need to go to Windows and choose Outliner from there, and that will open up the outliner as well. Once I've created these 3 objects for this particular planet, I can select one of them, hold the Shift key, select another, continue holding the Shift key, and select the other ring. So this is one way of selecting all 3 objects to have them all selected at one time. Another way would be to swipe around these. That works. And another way would be to come over to the outliner and Shift-click inside the outliner and select your objects that way. The next thing we can do is actually combine these into one big group. Now, combining them doesn't mean that they have the appropriate amount of vertices, the edges that are merged together. It does not mean that they are quadratic in nature. It simply is just going to combine them into one object that can be selected. So we can do that by clicking on the Mesh menu and then going down to Combine. So now you'll see that when you click off and click on, all 3 objects are selected at the same time, and they're all green in color of wireframe, meaning that they are all in object mode, not in component mode. This makes it really easy for you to select your object and move it around the stage area. The last thing I'm going to show you in this particular video is how to create text. If you go to the Create menu, you'll see that there's something in here called Type. So go to Create and choose Type. Older versions of Maya had multiple types of fonts or type or text that you could use that ranged between polygons and NURBS objects. The newer versions of Maya only give you this one option for the type mesh. So once you click on Type, you may or may not see any kind of content displayed on your screen. So if we click on Type 1, which is going to be at the top of the attribute panel, you'll see that this is the actual text that's being shown on the stage right now. So if I zoom out, you'll see that's where it says 3D Type. So if I click off of this and type in Maya, now you can see the words for Maya are being displayed right here. If you want to change the font type, you can do so at any time. Oops, I didn't change it. You can also increase or decrease the boldness, the font size, etc. So it's best to change the font size utilizing the Type tool versus using the Scale tool, as in the R key. So try to use the font size tool within here. You can also change the alignment of your font from left to center to right aligned if necessary. Lastly, if you look over here on the left-hand side inside of your outliner, it simply says Type Mesh 1. That's really not very descriptive as to what you're writing out. And in the case of some assignments or some projects, you might have multiple different types of font to be displayed. So you want to make sure that you always go back and rename this. Now you can leave the word type in front so that way you can denote that you're dealing with text versus a poly sphere or a cube. But let's say we say type and then say Maya. And this would be a great naming convention to keep all of your different type texts grouped together alphabetically, and it still states exactly what the actual text is itself. So when you click off, if you need to get to it very easily, you can click on it here, and then you can further adjust by using the W, the R, or the S, W, E, or R keys to further modify the placement of your actual object. Your F key again is how you can frame an object. If you find that it's too large, too small, once again, if you go back into your type mesh, you can modify your type 1 by changing the different scales within the section right here. You can also utilize the scale tool to make it narrow if you so desire. This is a polygonal object, so if for whatever reason you needed to extrude, like we demoed earlier with the cube, you can certainly select faces and extrude from here as well. Hopefully this was a decent overview as to what polygons are and how to create text inside of Maya.